Now we're going to talk about the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is kind of the master of the entire endocrine system. Most people think of the master of the endocrine system as the pituitary gland, and that is correct when you're looking at the endocrine system only, but the hypothalamus is the controller of the pituitary gland, so therefore it is actually the master of the master. It's the overall master of the endocrine system. And so it has direct control over the pituitary and indirect control over multiple other hormonal glands. The pituitary gland sits right here. The hypothalamus is right here. The structure right there is the hypothalamus. This is the pituitary. Sits in this region here called the sella turcica. And you learned about that last semester, chapter 8, when we did the bones. So the pituitary gland is a pea-shaped gland, very tiny, and it has two different parts to it. It has an anterior and a posterior structure. The anterior region is known as the adenohypophysis, which means the anterior pituitary. The posterior region is called the neurohypophysis. The posterior region is not a part of the pituitary gland, or is not an actual endocrine gland. It is nervous tissue. The anterior is actual endocrine material. What this means is the anterior pituitary produces and secretes its own hormones. The posterior does not produce any hormones. It's nervous tissue, and its job is to store hormones produced by the hypothalamus. It then releases those hormones when the hypothalamus tells it to. So there are two major hormones that are stored in the posterior pituitary. They're produced by the hypothalamus, but they're stored in the posterior pituitary. Oxytocin, which I talked a little bit about when I was talking about up and down regulation. And then antidiuretic hormone, also known as vasopressin. Other hormones produced by the hypothalamus are known as regulatory hormones. So these are either releasing hormones or inhibiting hormones. Releasing hormones are going to activate the anterior pituitary to release certain types of hormones. Inhibiting hormones are going to inhibit the anterior pituitary from producing and releasing certain hormones. And so here are some examples. Thyrotropin releasing hormone is going to activate the anterior pituitary to release thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyrotropic inhibiting hormone would stimulate the anterior pituitary to stop producing and secreting thyroid stimulating hormone. Make sense? I certainly hope so. The anterior pituitary then produces 6 of its own hormones. Most of these hormones are called tropic hormones, and if you remember, a tropic hormone is a hormone that is produced by one endocrine gland and activates another endocrine gland to secrete its own hormones. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Hold on. These are just hormones. I'm actually going to go, there we go. Okay, so here we have anterior pituitary hormones. Thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates the thyroid gland to produce thyroid hormone. Prolactin stimulates the mammary glands to produce milk. Follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone stimulate the ovaries and testes to produce the sperm and egg, as well as hormones to activate egg and sperm production, as well as get the uterus prepared. Growth hormone stimulates multiple cells to grow and develop. So this is released a lot during childhood and then in adults for repairing tissues. Adrenal corticotropic hormone is secreted to stimulate the adrenal glands to produce their hormones. What I didn't talk about, and I'll do this in a minute, I didn't talk about what oxytocin and what antidiuretic hormone do. I want to quickly discuss oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. Oxytocin stimulates uterine contractions, which I mentioned before, but it also helps with milk letdown in the mammary glands. Prolactin stimulates milk production, and then oxytocin comes along and stimulates the letdown reflex so that milk can flow easier. And oftentimes the cry of a baby is enough to stimulate oxytocin release. Oxytocin then causes milk letdown, and then you start lactating. And if you have ever breastfed, you know what I'm talking about. Now we're going to watch a quick video over the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. It's a 3-minute video, so enjoy it.
The hypothalamus is sometimes referred to as the master control center of the endocrine system because it regulates most endocrine functions of the body. Located at the base of the brain in the anterior portion of the diencephalon, the hypothalamus consists of several groups of neurons called nuclei, each with specific functions. The stalk-like infundibulum connects the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland, or hypophysis. The pituitary gland sits within the hypophyseal fossa of the sphenoid bone and is divided into anterior and posterior lobes. Each lobe of the pituitary gland interacts with the hypothalamus in a different way. The anterior pituitary, or adenohypophysis, is connected to the hypothalamus by a blood vessel network known as the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system. Hormones released by the hypothalamus travel through the portal system and regulate activities of the anterior pituitary. In contrast, the posterior pituitary, or neurohypophysis, is connected to the hypothalamus by neurons that form the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. Axons of these neurons transport hormones from the hypothalamus for storage in the posterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary is regulated by 2 classes of hypothalamic hormones: releasing hormones and inhibiting hormones. These hormones reach the anterior pituitary via the hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system and stimulate or suppress secretion of anterior pituitary hormones. Hormones secreted by the anterior pituitary then enter the bloodstream for distribution to their specific target tissues. For example, thyrotropin-releasing hormones secreted by the hypothalamus stimulates thyrotropic cells of the anterior pituitary to increase secretion of thyroid-stimulating hormone, which then regulates activity of the thyroid gland. The posterior pituitary produces no hormones of its own. Rather, neurosecretory cells in the hypothalamus synthesize 2 hormones: antidiuretic hormone, known as ADH or vasopressin, and oxytocin, that are transported to the posterior pituitary via the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. These hormones are stored in nerve terminals in the posterior pituitary and released into the blood upon stimulation of the axons. Each hormone has distinct functions. ADH acts on the kidneys to increase water retention from renal tubules. It also acts to constrict blood vessels. Oxytocin causes smooth muscle contraction in both the male and female reproductive tracts. It also stimulates milk ejection by the lactating mammary glands.
I did not talk about antidiuretic hormone. I mentioned it, and then I talked about oxytocin and not antidiuretic hormone. So antidiuretic hormone, typically think about it as it's an antidiuretic. diuretic makes you urinate. So antidiuretics are going to stop you from urinating. So it helps you to stay hydrated. So when you have less fluid in your system, antidiuretic hormone increases the number of aquaporins in our kidneys, and aquaporins allow more water to move into the blood. One of the clinical views that we talked about, or that we'll talk about, is a hypophysectomy. This is where you remove the pituitary gland. When this happens, you actually lose all function of the pituitary hormones. So you wouldn't have growth hormone or thyroid stimulating hormone or follicle stimulating hormone. And so you would have to have replacement therapy for the rest of your life. You'd be on hormones for the rest of your life. Some disorders associated with pituitary dysfunction, including having to have a hypophysectomy, would be pituitary dwarfism. With pituitary dwarfism, you don't have enough growth hormone during childhood, and so you grow, you grow, but you have a very short stature. That short stature also is associated with low blood pressure, low blood sugar, and other potential problems due to lack of that growth hormone. Pituitary giantism is the opposite, where you have a lot of growth hormone during childhood, and this causes your body size, your stature, to increase potentially to twice the normal size. So, well, I guess not. I won't say twice, because most people are about 5 foot something. So to like 8 or potentially 9 feet tall. Individuals that have pituitary giantism also tend to have larger organs, and they tend to have joint problems because of their large stature. They tend to have more cardiovascular problems, as well as they're more prone to diabetes. Acromegaly is a disorder associated with growth hormone release in adulthood. So when you have a lot of growth hormone released as an adult, certain regions you've already grew to your full size. So the growth plates in your arms and your legs, your fingers have all closed up, which means you're not able to grow in length anymore, but certain bones can thicken up. And so typically you see a larger skull, very large hands associated with acromegaly, large organs inside, and again, you're more prone to cardiovascular disorders as well as diabetes. I'm going to stop here, and I'll continue this on the next mini lecture that I post, okay? Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when you're watching this. Bye.